Everything belongs to me now, my stepmother said less than an hour after my father's funeral, and the way she smiled told me she had been waiting a very long time to say those words. My name is Caleb Bennett, and until that moment, I believed grief was the heaviest thing a person could carry. I was wrong. Suspicion was heavier. It settles on your shoulders and refuses to leave. The afternoon sky above the cemetery was gray, the kind of cold autumn day that seemed determined to drain every bit of color from the world. Friends and relatives slowly drifted toward their cars, offering quiet condolences before disappearing down the winding road. I stood beside my father's grave longer than most people. Thomas Bennett had been the strongest man I knew. He built a successful construction company from nothing, worked 6 days a week for nearly 40 years, and somehow still found time to coach my little league games and help me fix my first truck. Losing him felt unreal. Rebecca, my stepmother of 8 years, didn't look devastated. She looked relieved. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. People handle loss differently. That was the reasonable explanation. But as we gathered later at my father's house, the feeling grew stronger. The house itself felt strange without him. His reading glasses still rested on the end table beside his favorite recliner. A coffee mug sat in the kitchen sink exactly where he had left it. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders that he should have been there. Rebecca moved through the rooms like she was conducting a business meeting rather than mourning her husband. She accepted condolences with a practiced smile. She checked her phone repeatedly. She even interrupted conversations to discuss paperwork. Then came the comment. "Your father knew exactly who deserved his money," she said while pouring herself a glass of sparkling water. Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. I stared at her. "What does that mean?" I asked. She shrugged casually. "Nothing, Caleb. Just that Thomas made his decisions." Her answer should have ended the conversation, but it didn't. Something about her confidence bothered me. She wasn't acting like someone who hoped things would go her way. She was acting like someone who already knew the outcome. I noticed other things, too. Small things. The kind of details most people ignore. Whenever someone mentioned the upcoming reading of the will, Rebecca's expression brightened. When family friends shared stories about my father, she seemed impatient for them to finish. And every time someone spoke directly to me, she watched carefully, almost as if measuring my reaction. Late that evening, after most of the guests had left, I wandered into my father's study. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old books. He spent countless evenings there balancing company records, reading biographies, or writing notes on yellow legal pads. I sat in his chair and looked around. That was when I noticed something unusual. A framed family photograph had been moved. It wasn't much, maybe 2 inches. But my father was meticulous. He hated clutter and rarely changed anything without a reason. Beneath the photograph was a faint rectangular outline in the dust, suggesting something else had once been there. Something recently removed. My pulse quickened. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe grief was making me see mysteries where none existed. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that a piece of the puzzle was missing. As I left the study, I glanced toward the hallway. Rebecca was standing there, watching me. She smiled politely, but her eyes were cold. "You should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." I nodded and walked past her, but her words echoed in my mind all night. Tomorrow will be a long day. At the time, I thought she was talking about funeral arrangements and legal paperwork. I would soon learn she meant something very different. And for the first time since my father died, I began to wonder if he had left behind more than memories. The next morning felt colder than the day before. I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early, hoping the drive across town would clear my head. It did not. The building stood on a quiet street lined with maple trees that had already begun shedding their leaves. People hurried past carrying coffee cups and briefcases, continuing with ordinary lives while mine seemed suspended somewhere between loss and uncertainty. When I stepped into the conference room, Rebecca was already there. She sat at the far end of the polished table, wearing a navy blue suit I had never seen before. It looked expensive. More importantly, she looked comfortable. Not nervous, not emotional, comfortable. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Several relatives slowly filtered into the room. My Aunt Karen, my cousin Tyler, a longtime family friend named Richard. Everyone spoke quietly, exchanging the kind of careful small talk people use when they are avoiding larger subjects. Rebecca barely participated. Instead, she occasionally checked her phone and smiled to herself. The attorney handling the estate entered precisely at 10 o'clock. He introduced himself, thanked everyone for coming, and began explaining the process. His voice was calm and professional. I tried to focus on his words, but my attention kept drifting toward Rebecca. She sat with her hands folded neatly in front of her, almost as if she already knew everything that was about to be said. Then the reading began. My father's estate included the family home, investment accounts, company shares, several rental properties, and various personal assets accumulated over decades. Hearing the summary felt strange. Every item represented years of work, early mornings, late nights, sacrifices, memories. The attorney turned a page and continued. Rebecca would receive primary ownership of the residence and substantial financial assets. Additional holdings would remain under her control. More assets followed, then more. I waited for the balance to shift. It never did. My name eventually appeared, but only briefly. A modest inheritance, respectable by ordinary standards, yet surprisingly small compared to everything else. For several seconds I wondered if I had misunderstood. My father and I had always been close. We spoke every week. We worked together for years. None of this made sense. Across the table, Rebecca lowered her eyes, attempting to appear humble. The performance might have been convincing if I had not noticed the faint satisfaction at the corner of her mouth. When the meeting ended, people began gathering their belongings. A few relatives looked uncomfortable. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Rebecca approached me near the doorway. "Your father made his choices," she said softly. "I hope you can respect that." There was something rehearsed about the sentence, something artificial. I forced a nod. "Of course." She smiled. "That is probably for the best." Then she walked away. I remained standing there long after everyone else had left. The attorney's assistant eventually asked if I needed anything. I told her no and headed outside. The afternoon sun had finally broken through the clouds, but I barely noticed. As I sat in my truck, a memory surfaced unexpectedly. About 4 months before his death, my father and I had been fishing at a small lake 2 hours north of town. We were packing our gear when he asked a question that seemed strange at the time. "Caleb," he said, staring out across the water, "if someone betrayed this family, would you want to know the truth?" I had laughed and asked what he meant. He never answered directly. Instead, he looked away and said, "Sometimes people reveal themselves when they think nobody is paying attention." At the time, I assumed he was speaking in general terms. Sitting in that parking lot, I realized something unsettling. Maybe he was trying to tell me something. Maybe the conversation had not been random at all. For the next several days, I could not stop thinking about that conversation by the lake. The more I replayed it in my mind, the less accidental it seemed. My father had never been the type of man to speak in riddles. He was direct, practical, and careful with his words. If he asked a question, there was usually a reason behind it. I found myself looking back at the last year of his life through a different lens. Small moments I had ignored suddenly felt significant. I remembered visiting him one Saturday afternoon at the company office. He was standing beside the filing cabinets with several folders spread across his desk. When I walked in, he quickly closed one of them and changed the subject. At the time, I assumed he was dealing with confidential business matters. Now I was not so sure. Another memory surfaced. About 6 months before he passed away, he called me unusually late one evening. His voice sounded distracted. He asked whether I had received a package he supposedly mailed earlier that week. I told him no. There was a long silence before he replied, "That is strange." When I asked what was inside, he simply said it was nothing important. We never discussed it again. At the time, I accepted the explanation. Looking back, it felt incomplete. Then there was Rebecca. Once I started paying attention, I realized how much had changed after she entered our lives. In the beginning, she appeared friendly and supportive. She remembered birthdays, organized holiday dinners, and always seemed eager to help. My father looked happy, and that was enough for me. But over time, subtle differences emerged. She gradually took control of household finances. She began screening phone calls. She handled more of his correspondence. If someone wanted to schedule a meeting with him, they often went through her first. None of those things seemed suspicious individually. Together, however, they painted a different picture. One evening I drove past my father's house without planning to. The lights were on inside. Rebecca's car sat in the driveway. For several minutes I remained parked across the street, staring at the familiar home. It no longer felt familiar. Eventually, I left and stopped at a diner a few miles away. I ordered coffee and opened the notes application on my phone. For the first time, I began writing down every unusual memory I could recall. The late-night phone call, the hidden folders, the missing package, the strange question by the lake. As the list grew longer, a pattern seemed to emerge. My father had been concerned about something. More importantly, he had been concerned for quite some time. Near midnight, another memory returned with startling clarity. About 3 months before his death, we attended a charity event together. During the drive home, he casually mentioned updating some legal documents. I remember joking that he was too healthy to be worrying about paperwork. He laughed but then said something I had forgotten until that moment. The right documents can protect people long after you are gone. At the time, it sounded like ordinary estate planning. Sitting alone in that diner booth, it sounded like a warning. I stared out the window at the empty parking lot and felt a chill despite the warm coffee in my hands. For the first time, I began to wonder whether my father had anticipated exactly what would happen after he was gone. And if that was true, perhaps he had also left behind a way to uncover the truth. The following week, I stopped relying on memories alone and started looking for facts. If my father had truly suspected something, evidence had to exist somewhere. He was not the kind of man who acted on instinct without documentation. For nearly 40 years, he ran a successful business by keeping records, saving correspondence, and double-checking every important decision. That habit did not disappear overnight. One afternoon, I visited the company office where he had spent most of his working life. The building felt strangely quiet without him. Employees still greeted me warmly, but I could sense the same uncertainty that had settled over the family. Everyone knew ownership questions were hanging in the air. I walked through the hallways slowly, taking in familiar details. Framed photographs of completed projects lined the walls. Awards sat in glass cases. My father had built all of it step by step. As I entered his former office, I immediately noticed something missing. Several shelves appeared unusually empty. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, but I remembered those shelves being filled with binders and archived files. I asked the office manager whether records had been moved. She hesitated before answering. Rebecca stopped by a few weeks ago and requested some boxes. My attention sharpened. What kind of boxes? I asked. Old financial records. At least that is what she called them. The answer stayed with me for the rest of the day. Later that evening, I reviewed company documents that were still available. Nothing appeared obviously wrong. Revenue reports matched previous years. Property records seemed normal. Yet one detail stood out. Several months before his death, my father had authorized a series of consultations with outside advisors. The amounts were not large, but they were unusual. He rarely hired external experts unless a matter was extremely important. I searched further and discovered appointments with an estate planner, a tax specialist, and another consultant whose name I did not recognize. The trail felt incomplete, but it was the first concrete sign that he had been preparing something. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued acting as though everything had already been settled. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard she was discussing renovations to the house and making plans involving assets she had recently gained control over. Her confidence seemed almost impossible to explain. Most people would wait until every legal detail was finalized. Rebecca behaved as though there was no chance of disagreement. One evening, another unexpected clue arrived. While sorting through old emails, I found a message from my father sent nearly 5 months earlier. The subject line simply read, "Reminder." I almost ignored it because the content appeared ordinary. He asked about a family barbecue and whether I was bringing dessert. But near the end was a sentence that suddenly caught my attention. "Keep copies of everything important. You never know when they might matter." At the time, I thought he was referring to business paperwork. Now I wondered if the message carried a second meaning. The deeper I looked, the more I felt as though my father had been leaving small breadcrumbs behind. Not enough to reveal the truth directly, just enough to guide someone willing to pay attention. Then, 3 nights later, a new discovery changed everything. While reviewing archive correspondence, I found reference to a private meeting that had taken place less than 2 months before my father passed away. The meeting was not with the attorney who handled the public reading of the will. It was with someone else entirely. Someone whose name I had never heard before. The name appeared only once in the archive correspondence, buried between routine scheduling messages and accounting notes. Daniel Hayes. At first it meant nothing to me. The email simply confirmed a private appointment at a law office downtown. No explanation, no attached documents, no details about the purpose of the meeting. Yet the date immediately caught my attention. It had taken place less than 8 weeks before my father passed away. I stared at the screen for several minutes. If this meeting was important enough to be recorded, why had nobody mentioned it during the reading of the estate documents? The next morning I began making phone calls. Most led nowhere. Receptionists politely explained that client information was confidential. Legal assistants apologized and refused to discuss private matters. By lunchtime, I was no closer to understanding who Daniel Hayes was or why my father had met with him. Then something unexpected happened. An old family friend called me. Her name was Margaret Collins. She and my father had known each other for nearly 20 years through various community organizations and charity projects. We had not spoken since the funeral. Her voice sounded hesitant. "Caleb, I think there is something you should know," she said. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near the river. Margaret arrived carrying a leather folder that looked older than both of us. After ordering tea, she sat quietly for a moment before speaking. "Your father was worried during the last year of his life," she said. "He never told me everything, but he told me enough to know he was concerned." My pulse quickened. "Concerned about what?" She glanced around the room before answering. "About trust." The word hung between us. Margaret explained that my father had asked several unusual questions during their conversations. Questions about protecting assets. Questions about long-term planning. Questions about what people reveal when they believe they have already won. None of it made complete sense at the time. Then she opened the folder. Inside was a business card. Daniel Hayes. The same name I had discovered in the archived email. "Thomas asked me to keep this," she said. "He told me that if anything ever felt wrong after he was gone, I should give it to you." I stared at the card. My father had never mentioned Margaret's involvement. The realization sent a chill through me. Whatever he had been preparing, he had done so quietly and carefully. "Why did you wait until now?" I asked. Margaret sighed. "Because I hoped none of this would be necessary." She then revealed something even more surprising. A few months before his death, my father had scheduled multiple meetings that were never discussed publicly. Not with business partners, not with family members, with specialists, advisors, professionals who handled estate protection and complex legal matters. According to Margaret, he seemed determined to put certain safeguards in place. "He told me one thing I will never forget," she said softly. "He said that the truth has a way of surviving if you leave it somewhere safe." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Outside the window, people walked along the riverfront enjoying a bright afternoon. Inside, I felt as though another piece of a hidden puzzle had finally clicked into place. Before leaving, Margaret handed me a folded sheet of paper from inside the folder. Written on it was an address in downtown Chicago and a single handwritten note in my father's unmistakable handwriting. The message contained only 6 words. "When the time comes, contact him." Beneath the sentence was the same name I had now encountered twice. Daniel Hayes. The following morning, I called the number printed on Daniel Hayes's business card. I expected a receptionist, a voicemail system, or perhaps a polite refusal. Instead, the call was answered almost immediately. "Law Office of Daniel Hayes," a calm voice said. I introduced myself and explained that my father, Thomas Bennett, had been a client. There was a brief silence. Then the voice asked a question that immediately caught my attention. "Are you Caleb Bennett?" My grip tightened around the phone. "Yes." Another pause followed. "Mr. Hayes has been expecting your call." For several seconds I could not speak. Expecting my call? My father had been gone for weeks. Yet somehow this attorney seemed unsurprised to hear from me. An appointment was scheduled for the following day. The office occupied the upper floor of a historic building overlooking downtown Chicago. Unlike the large corporate firms I had visited before, this place felt private and discreet. Framed legal certificates lined the walls. Shelves filled with leather-bound volumes stretched from floor to ceiling. When Daniel Hayes entered the conference room, he appeared to be in his late 50s, composed and professional. He shook my hand firmly and invited me to sit. "Your father was an exceptional man," he said, "and a very careful one." The conversation began cautiously. He explained that attorney-client confidentiality limited what he could disclose without authorization. Then he opened a file folder and reviewed several documents. After confirming my identity, he finally looked up. Your father instructed me to assist you if certain circumstances developed after his passing. My heart began to race. What circumstances? I asked. Mr. Hayes folded his hands. He believed there was a possibility important information would not immediately come to light. That answer only deepened the mystery. For nearly an hour, he asked questions instead of providing answers. He wanted to know about the funeral, the estate reading, Rebecca's behavior, my observations during the weeks following my father's death. I described everything as accurately as possible. The confidence she displayed, the missing records, the unusual meetings, the comments that never seemed to fit. Mr. Hayes listened carefully and occasionally took notes. Finally, he stood and walked toward a cabinet secured with a key. From inside, he removed a sealed envelope bearing my father's signature across the back flap. The sight of his handwriting instantly sent a wave of emotion through me. Mr. Hayes placed the envelope on the table but did not hand it over. "Not yet," he said. "There is another step first." He then revealed something that changed everything. Several months before his death, my father had rented a secure safe deposit box at a private bank. According to the records, specific instructions had been left regarding its contents. Access would become available only under carefully defined conditions. More importantly, those conditions had now been met. I stared at him in disbelief. "What is inside?" I asked. For the first time during our meeting, a faint smile appeared on his face. "That," he replied, "is exactly what your father wanted you to discover for yourself." The following morning, we would travel to the bank together. And for the first time since this entire mystery began, I felt certain that the answers were finally within reach. The private bank occupied a granite building that looked more like a museum than a financial institution. The following morning, Daniel Hayes met me in the lobby shortly after 9 o'clock. Neither of us spoke much during the elevator ride. The anticipation had become almost unbearable. For weeks, I had been chasing fragments of information, assembling clues that never quite formed a complete picture. Now, for the first time, it felt like I was standing directly in front of the truth. A bank representative escorted us through a series of secure doors before leading us into a private viewing room. After verifying documents and signatures, she returned carrying a medium-sized metal box. My pulse quickened as she placed it on the table and left us alone. Daniel nodded toward the box. "Your father prepared this carefully," he said. "Take your time." I opened it slowly. Inside were several neatly organized folders, a sealed envelope, and a small leather journal. Everything had been labeled in my father's handwriting. Seeing those familiar letters immediately brought back memories of business meetings, handwritten notes, and birthday cards. For a moment, I simply stared at the contents without touching anything. Then I reached for the first folder. The documents inside revealed months of financial reviews, correspondence, and legal consultations. My father had been conducting a detailed examination of various estate matters long before his death. Every page reinforced the same conclusion. Nothing had been left to chance. The second folder contained records that surprised me even more. There were notes documenting concerns about specific decisions being made within the household. Conversations had been summarized. Dates had been recorded. Situations I vaguely remembered now appeared preserved. In writing, my father had not been acting on vague suspicions. He had been documenting patterns. Careful patterns. Consistent patterns. As I continued reading, Daniel remained silent. He understood that I needed time to process what I was seeing. Eventually, I reached the sealed envelope. Across the front, my father had written a simple instruction. Open only after reviewing everything else. My hands felt unsteady as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter addressed directly to me. The first sentence stopped me cold. "Caleb, if you are reading this, events unfolded exactly as I feared they might." I read every word twice. My father explained that during the final year of his life, he became increasingly concerned about certain motivations within the family. He intentionally avoided confrontation because he wanted facts rather than arguments. Instead, he worked quietly with professionals to ensure his true wishes would be protected. Then came the sentence that changed everything. He informed me that the estate documents presented during the initial reading were not the final controlling documents regarding the majority of his assets. I looked up at Daniel in disbelief. He simply nodded. My father had created an updated estate plan through a separate legal structure. The documents had been prepared under strict confidentiality and stored outside the locations most people would expect. Additional safeguards had been included to prevent interference. My heart raced as I continued reading. The final pages contained references to a revised will, trust amendments, and specific instructions regarding future distribution of assets. Everything pointed toward one unavoidable conclusion. The version presented after his death was not the complete story. Somewhere, a newer and more authoritative set of documents existed. I lowered the papers and looked at Daniel. "You already know what is in those documents, do you not?" I asked. He met my gaze calmly. "Yes," he replied, "and I believe it is time for the rest of the family to learn the truth as well." 3 days later, the family gathered once again in a conference room, but this time the atmosphere felt completely different. Word had spread that new information had surfaced regarding my father's estate. Nobody knew exactly what that meant. Relatives arrived early, speaking in hushed voices. Some appeared curious. Others looked nervous. Rebecca entered last. Her confidence had returned. She greeted people politely and took her seat near the head of the table. When she noticed Daniel Hayes sitting beside me, a brief flicker of surprise crossed her face before disappearing. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Daniel remained calm as everyone settled into their chairs. The original estate attorney was present as well, along with several advisors and witnesses. Once the room became quiet, Daniel stood and introduced himself. He explained that he had represented Thomas Bennett in a series of private legal matters during the final months of his life. Rebecca immediately interrupted. "I was never informed about any additional attorney." Daniel nodded politely. "That was intentional." The room fell silent. For the first time, Rebecca appeared genuinely unsettled. Daniel then began presenting documentation from the secure deposit box. Every record had been organized, dated, and professionally prepared. There were consultation notes, legal directives, signed instructions, and correspondence demonstrating that my father had continued revising his estate plans after the documents previously presented to the family had been created. As the evidence accumulated, the mood inside the room shifted. Family members exchanged glances. Questions appeared on faces throughout the table. Rebecca attempted to object several times, but each objection was answered by another document, another signature, another record, another piece of evidence. Then Daniel introduced the most important file of all, the updated estate package. According to the accompanying certifications, it had been executed properly, witnessed appropriately, and stored according to the instructions established by my father. Every procedural requirement had been satisfied. Daniel carefully distributed copies to the relevant parties. I watched as Rebecca opened hers. The color gradually drained from her face. She turned pages rapidly, searching for something. Then she turned them again and again. The confidence that had defined her behavior since the funeral slowly disappeared. Several relatives noticed the change immediately. The revised documents dramatically altered the distribution of major assets. My father's intentions were expressed with remarkable clarity. Safeguards had been incorporated. Oversight provisions had been added. Conditions had been specified. Nothing had been left open to interpretation. Most importantly, the structure ensured that control of significant portions of the estate would follow the plan outlined in the newer documents rather than the assumptions many people had formed after the initial reading. Rebecca finally spoke. "This cannot be right." Daniel calmly slid another document across the table. It contained additional verification from independent professionals involved in the process. Her response faded into silence. The room remained quiet as people absorbed what they were seeing. Years of assumptions seemed to collapse in real time. For weeks, everyone had believed the story was finished. In reality, it had barely begun. Then Daniel opened the final folder and looked toward me. "There is one more item Thomas Bennett instructed us to present today," he said. He removed a sealed letter bearing my father's signature. Several family members leaned forward in their chairs. Even Rebecca stared at it without speaking. Daniel carefully placed the letter on the table and looked around the room. These were Thomas Bennett's final personal instructions to his family. And with that, he broke the seal. The room became so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning overhead. Daniel unfolded the letter carefully and began reading. The moment I heard my father's words, it felt as though he had stepped back into the room. "To my family, if this letter is being read, then the time has come for complete honesty." Every eye remained fixed on Daniel. My father explained that he had spent the final year of his life evaluating not only his finances, but also the character of the people around him. He wrote that wealth was not the most valuable thing he would leave behind. Trust was, integrity was, truth was. As Daniel continued, several relatives lowered their eyes. Others listened with growing emotion. Then my father addressed the reason for the revised estate plan. He wrote that certain actions had raised concerns he could not ignore. Rather than confront anyone directly, he chose to verify facts, seek professional advice, and protect the future according to his genuine wishes. He emphasized that every decision reflected careful consideration rather than anger or resentment. The letter then shifted toward me. "Caleb," Daniel read, "if you are hearing this, I want you to understand something. The greatest comfort of my final years was knowing the man you became." My throat tightened. My father wrote about our fishing trips, our years working together, and the countless ordinary conversations that now felt priceless. He explained that responsibility had never been about money. It had always been about stewardship, about protecting what mattered, about treating people fairly. Several family members glanced toward me. I could barely focus on anything except the sound of my father's words. Then came the final revelation. The revised estate documents confirmed exactly what Daniel had implied. My father had transferred the majority of his personal holdings, company interests, and long-term assets into structures governed by the updated plan. The inheritance distribution reflected his final intentions rather than the assumptions everyone had formed after the initial reading. Every safeguard he described had been properly executed. Every instruction had been documented. Every legal requirement had been satisfied. The strategy had worked exactly as he intended. When Daniel finished reading, silence filled the room again. This time it felt different. The uncertainty that had surrounded everything for weeks had finally disappeared. Rebecca remained motionless, staring down at the documents in front of her. She no longer argued. She no longer interrupted. The confidence that once seemed unshakable had vanished entirely. Around the table, relatives slowly began processing what they had witnessed. The mystery was over. The truth had survived exactly as my father predicted. After the meeting ended, people approached me one by one. Some offered support. Others shared memories about my father. Several admitted they had sensed something was wrong, but never understood what. Outside the building, the afternoon sun reflected from the windows of nearby offices. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace. Not because of the assets, not because of the outcome, because I finally understood what my father had been trying to protect. Weeks earlier, I thought I had lost everything important the day he died. Standing there, I realized how wrong I had been. My father did leave me an inheritance, but the most valuable thing he left was not measured in dollars. It was proof that he never stopped looking out for me, even after he knew he would be gone. And in the end, that truth was worth far more than any number written on a balance sheet.